Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins, Truergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is going to be another presentation of an observation regarding a particular conversation that has been getting quite a bit of attention lately, and once more I've written up sort of an essay combining and structuring my thoughts regarding the conversation, and we'll be reading it off of my tablet here for the purposes of the script here for this video. So, going to proceed moving on now. Without purpose, it will all turn gray. By yours truly. Back in December of 2025, I put out a paper entitled Dreams and Nightmares in Carbon and Silicone, a wide-angle lens look at the phenomenon of AI in terms of the primary camps engaging in conversations on the topic broadly speaking, and looking at the historical parallels of modern-day AI and artificial beings in mythologies, both old and new. That piece concluded with some thoughts I had regarding our duties and obligations toward ensouled mechanoids in the future, if such a thing ever becomes real, if there is a singularity event. I will include a link to that paper in the description of this video, in the event anyone's interested in reading through that. During the course of that lengthy essay, I also mentioned that at some point, I wanted to address some of the more specific subtopics under the broader umbrella of AI. Here, I'd like to start that set of observations, beginning with generative visual AI art. As an individual with very little comprehension regarding the specific computer science, programming, and technical elements that go into this practice, I will be focusing primarily upon the two farthest reaching camps in the general public conversation, the hardcore anti-Gen AI and the hardcore pro-Gen AI. Henceforth, I will either shorthand these camps into antis or pros, though I will occasionally use some insulting terminology for the sake of humor or emphasis. I am somewhat embarrassed to admit that I have taken rather a long time to finally get around to this specific subtopic, though I will give myself a little bit of breathing room by pointing out that for much of the year thus far, I've been working on a free novel for my Substack entitled In the City, the Peaceful City. Head on over to thestorytellerscorner.substack.com to read through that, and performing a couple of analytical readings. I sort of let this one go onto the back burner for a bit, since I'm a fiction wonk first and foremost. So, without further preamble, let us get started. There's always an English lesson with me. When it comes to the usage of AI in the production of any creative endeavor, any art, it is referred to as generative AI or Gen AI. What precisely is generative? Like many words or phrases in English, the term is derived from Latin, the word generare, which means to beget or produce. And yes, by beget, I mean in the sense of the biblical usage. Why do you think each age block is referred to as a generation? Each successive generation is the product of their parents, well, begetting them. Cue 70s wah-wah pedal porno track. If one really wanted to engage in wordplay here, you can easily hear examples of folks saying that they have been fucking around with ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, Gemini, insert app or service name here, in order to produce some creative result. Of course, per the antis, one can also easily recall members of that camp saying that AI is going to fuck us all. Either way, somebody's getting screwed. Linguistic tomfoolery aside, allow me to confess to what finally provoked me to come back around to this particular examination. I try not to allow myself to be what is referred to as terminally online, but I will confess that, like many folks in America around my age, 44 as of time of writing this, I find myself diving into the internet quite a bit. Lost my place here. Sorry about that. There are so many subcultures and arenas of interest to interact with online that it can be pretty daunting to try and figure out even the tiniest fraction of it, and I have only so much human bandwidth to work with. For the most part, I delve into genre fiction, mythology, American football, MMA, animation, video games, comic books, and psychology and psychiatry. I'm aware that there's a distinction between those, but I approach them as two parts of a whole area of interest. Stepping into any one of these spheres of interest or appreciation since around 2012, 2014 leaves one invariably bombarded with demands from the loudest sociopolitical ideologues online that the sphere in question must be aligned with or maneuvered into alignment with their specific set of ideologies and shibboleths. For folks who just want to enjoy the sphere, whether it be running through the Mushroom Kingdom or catching highlights of the wildest receptions from the past weekend in the NFL, UFL, IFL. I watch a lot of football, folks, okay? I'm a football degenerate. Or seeing if the new illustrators doing the principal work on a comic book series are bringing a new aesthetic to the title. This started off as just mildly annoying. However, the escalation of just how thoroughly these ideologues have infiltrated these spheres of activity has reached a level that now makes it almost impossible for the average participant to approach their chosen field of interest without reflexively flinching or checking for traps like some kind of survivalist with OCD who has to unlock and relock his cabinet of MREs exactly 9 times every time he checks his stash, because if he doesn't, the alien mothership will come back to take him off to the planet Krypton. You get my point, right? In all of these spheres, there tends to be a period of initial interest and support, then expansion, beyond the niche into the semi-common. And just before it can go mainstream, in come the ideologues. Well, one of these spheres of interest is VTubing, itself a subcategory of the subculture of online streaming and or video sharing, which sees creators replace themselves on screen in the flesh with, instead, an animated avatar, colloquially referred to within the sphere as their model. The model is programmed by someone known as a rigger, who utilizes a kind of digital puppeteering to allow the VTuber to control the movements and appearance of the model on screen that audiences watch, listen to, and interact with. The whole dynamic is based heavily on something referred to as idol culture from Japan. But I'm going to stop right there in terms of trying to parse out all of the specifics, because I'm not knowledgeable enough to go further than that without being either insulting or exposing just how lacking in familiarity I am with the sphere. I don't intend to disrespect these folks' passion and pursuit. I am aware of the phenomenon of VTubing from the perspective of someone who listens to or watches a small handful of personalities in that space. I'm just a guy in the audience for a few of them. And trust me when I tell you, it is a tiny portion that I'm even familiar with. Thanks to the fact that I follow several of them on YouTube and or X/Twitter, and the fact that the algorithms on every social media service, including video sharing platforms, those services fill the never-ending scroll of users' feeds with suggested channels or users or videos or posts, all in a quest to keep their user base captive. Because of that, I catch wind of ongoing events within the VTubing space. Recently, there's been a bit of hurly-burly in this area, thanks in no small part to the VTubing sphere suffering a cross-traffic collision with the larger conversation of Gen AI art. One of the folks who has driven a veritable tanker truck filled with nitroglycerin headlong into the pileup is one Leaflet. And if I'm not mistaken, she seems to have put her foot to the floor on the accelerator and aimed for the wreckage, laughing like a gleeful little retard the whole way. The basics of the conversation. The antis in the broader Gen AI art conversation have, as their core concern regarding its use, the following perspective. This is their view, the antis. Gen AI steals the work of living human artists as well as all available visual data and references elsewise, and uses mathematically processed algorithms that can spit out results which can approximate that human-made material without giving any credit in any way to its sources. In short, the machines are being used to steal artists' stuff. The pro-Gen AI art folks, who I refer to as sometimes the pro-bros and hoes, typical response to this is some sort of, actually, all artists borrow / learn / source from other artists all the time. That's how they learn. This just saves time and effort and gets the desired result without the wasteful in-between steps. Folks like Leaflet and her American-born Canadian attack dog, Ember Paradox, have taken lately to adding in some flavor insults or ad hominem to twist the knife of this counter, usually in the form of what I just did myself, paraphrasing the "it's intellectual theft" line in their most obnoxious retard voice in an attempt to dismiss or denigrate the anti's concerns in question. Now, to be fair to the pro-bros, they make a perfectly cogent and logical point with their counter in the comparison of how a human artist learns and references prior works with how a machine or program does effectively the same thing. Where I believe they are being utterly disingenuous, however, is in the methodology of that learning process. If you ask a human artist where they draw their inspiration from, pun intended, they can actually give you a thoughtful answer, a response that has some depth of meaning and intent. There are logically chosen options that they put forth. They make an intentional choice. The machine or application, however, cannot give you this, because as of this moment, it has no intent or meaning beyond respond to input or prompt. There is no reverence for what came before, no pursuit of intent or message or technique, because it is just a program, sans qualia. The next contention that the antis tend to turn to, usually the artists and creatives themselves in that camp, is one that I almost wish that they wouldn't bring up given the response that they usually get. This contention is that the use of Gen AI strips away or renders meaningless the human creatives' efforts and their learning process. The reason I wish that they wouldn't bring this up is because it is, as they usually present it, an appeal to emotion, to sympathy, the humane and benevolent decency, and frankly, a lot of the pro-bros and hoes do not give a tin shite about such appeals because they aren't couched in pure logic or economics. Moreover, those similar in perspective to Leaflet have said, and I am paraphrasing her here, nobody cares about that, they only care about the results. From a raw marketplace or economic perspective, I'd say she's about 98% correct. There is no clean counter from a raw, materialist worldview. I do not grant her 100% on this, though, because not every client looking for creative products is as much of a heartless, mercenary cunt. Some few clients or customers actually do care about the people making the art and their process. But most of even those folks, those clients, are going to go with their financial bottom line, because that's just sound business. You don't have to like it, but you do have to acknowledge that that's the framework in which we live and operate. On the flip side of the coin, many folks in the pro camp on Gen AI have pointed out that often human artists will take excessive time on their projects or charge an inordinate amount for their works. There will be delays when the folks who are the clients need these products in a given specific time frame. Moreover, not a small number of these artists will flatly decline a client outright over differences of socio-political worldview. And in quite literally every instance where this has been the case that I've seen, the artist in question has a leftist, progressive, liberal, Democrat worldview. And they are declining clients who they perceive, accurately or no, as anywhere to the right of Mao Zedong. Seriously, if anyone out there can show me proof positive of a conservative or right-leaning human artist rejecting a commission or contract offer from a left-aligned client, please do share that and do so publicly. As a fellow with a hyperactive imagination, I have no problem conceptualizing the idea. Someone's going to bring up the baker in Colorado. I don't doubt it. But as things currently stand in this VTubing space conversation of this sphere, I haven't seen that. But I do have to accept the notion as possible, as potential. But only as potential, because thus far I've seen no other evidence of it. While this sort of thing is foolish, I acknowledge these artists' right of free association. The response of the rejected client, if they are barred from commissioning you based on ideology, well, and you make them aware of that, that's also covered by that prospective client's right of free association and free expression. They're allowed to put you on blast. If you tell them, I'm not going to work with you, chud, because you're a fascist crumpler tardican, or whatever other term you opt to lob at them, the rejected client has every right to expose that communication to the world. To such clients, bear this in mind. If a shitlib refuses you as a client, you are not inherently duty-bound to hop onto social media to performatively own them by turning to Gen AI. Not every interaction we have on a daily basis needs to be broadcast. It is your absolute right to do so, yes. I'm just observing that it's not always necessary. Patience is a virtue, but my supply is limited. There's a line that the fiercest pro-Gen AI advocates have stepped right up to, and which some have stepped right past with the kind of hubris that is normally reserved for politicians and preachers. That line is labeled stability, and most of the pros stumble back and forth along it, usually crossing over just long enough to run into trouble and invariably come back to sanity. Productivity is a huge buzzword for the tech-enamored, who often also seem to start taking on a vaguely inhuman affect when the term seems to replace purpose in their lexicon. As a group, they have become just as nauseating to read or hear from as the most belligerent antis. The argumentation on both extremes has reached levels of hostility that normally would require at least a decade to fully develop. But thanks in no small part, I suspect, to the nature of Gen AI's rapid evolution of capabilities, it is ramped up to peak intensity in almost no time at all, comparatively. The anti's primary concerns revolve around notions of creative integrity, ownership of work, and having their efforts acknowledged. These concerns are, broadly speaking, met with dismissals, insults, hand waves, and an attitude that borders on the same kind of corporate psychopathy that the folks at Enron would have blushed at the sight of. The pros primary promotion points tackle the inevitability of advancing technology, ease of access, and endeavors to make Gen AI palatable as a set of tools rather than as a wholesale surrender of the pursuit of arts to soulless machines or a replacement for people. Much as I have bagged on them, the pro-bros have maintained throughout all of these conversations and arguments that there is still a human being involved in the process, that the Gen AI programs and apps do not spontaneously churn out results. Someone has to sit at a keyboard and type in the commands to start the whole process. Each step requires human input. They aren't wrong about that. A point of advice I would like to offer to the anti-Gen AI artists themselves is as follows. If you decide to not work with a potential client, stop telling them why. You don't have to explain the decision, period. Just say no and move along. If said client sees that your commissions are still open and they prod you with an inquiry regarding why you declined them, you are under no obligation to explain the decision. There are genuinely situations where the less you say, the better off you will be. Sure, they may make inferences, accusations, and implications about the motivation for your rejection, the whole Candace Owens, "I'm just asking questions" nonsense. But if you don't provide them with proof, by flapping your self-righteous yapper at them, you will be fine. And a point of advice to the pro-bros and hoes. Recognize the following. That when you persistently and aggressively devalue and dehumanize the entire creative process, you are engaging in demoralization just as surely as any good little commie scumfuck. Ease up on the folks who aren't ready to take that leap with you. They're not there yet. And the harder you push, the more you are bound to make them resent you. My bias is showing. To the antis, another word of caution, if you haven't already gotten sick of reading or hearing me. The pro-bros aren't entirely wrong. You are going to potentially get left behind. Most modern folks have little or no patience these days, no understanding of delayed gratification, no appreciation for anything that they can't get or use immediately. And frankly, economically, there's a certain sense to that. That isn't even entirely their fault either. The pro-bros are so hustle-minded, they likely couldn't tell you the last time they did something just for the sake of doing it. I can't imagine they could express when last they just took a walk or sat by a fire or quietly watched the traffic go by without filming it or commenting on it later for the production of content. There are folks who are culturally programmed to try and commodify and monetize every waking moment of their lives. In a way, sometimes I pity them. Nothing is profoundly sacred or awe-inspiring to such dopamine and line-go-up junkies. And yeah, I'm giving them shit here, a lot more than I am the antis, but like I implied, I don't think it's entirely their fault. Over the last 10 to 15 years at least, the state of our economies in the West have not been conducive to the slow and steady and doing the right thing approach. To the pro-bros and hoes, I have a direct question. Have you ever heard of model collapse? If human artists get to the point where they believe their sum total works are just going to be fed into these programs and algorithms, used merely as fodder to inform the great machines, what motivation will they have to bother creating anything anymore? The profit motive is not the only motive that there is, despite it being the primary one that most folks operate with these days, artists included. There's also recognition, which sometimes congeals into fame or clout seeking. There's also duty, respect for the pursuit itself, and one motivation which I'm going to go into now that I don't doubt is going to lose some of you at this point. I won't be shocked. This is the hippy-dippy woo-woo part, folks. The draw of art, again, pun intended, in all of its forms, be it music, narrative, illustrative, poetic, constructive, such as sculpture or pottery, architecture, comes from the divine. The pull artists feel to craft, to create, to strive ever to learn and improve in our techniques, methods, and offerings. It is an innate attempt to express beauty, to find and speak to truth, capital T truth, to use our imaginations as only we as human beings, given these gifts by our Creator, can. That is the mission of art, the core of its drive. It is purpose given a form for the creative soul. Most folks nowadays, pardon me a moment, most folks nowadays have a tendency to cling to the academic framing of the purpose of art, that its aim is to evoke an emotional, intellectual, or primary reaction, and or to at least entertain the audience at a base level. They miss the forest for the trees when citing this understanding, however, because they go only that far and no farther. They purposely avoid or deny the sacred duty of art, to bring mankind closer to the ultimate in truth and beauty, to help them at least momentarily be in the near contact presence of the divine. Folks like Leaflet are increasingly seeing the arts primarily as vulgar tools of profitability and self-serving delivery systems of ideology, divorced entirely from purpose, from divinity. In her understandable frustration and opposition to the creative woke scolds and commie scumbags trying to assert dominion and control over who can or can't be involved in art as a creator or as a patron, she has decided to just debase and devalue entirely the human effort and striving component of art that goes into the creative process. Because line go up. Because only results matter. Handing over artistic creation to machines might seem like a great idea for the sake of efficiency, for productivity, sure. But it also tells me that the pro-bros and hoes, and those of a similar approach, have failed to comprehend one of the key lessons taught by economics as they've operated since the Industrial Revolution's beginning, and it is this. Whenever a machine is introduced into the production process, a standard gets pretty quickly established, a uniformity. That uniformity becomes the expected norm, what the customer becomes accustomed to. Deviations or errors get sanded off. This is reasonable and logical for the production of tangible products and goods that require production of scale, like cars or tools or furniture. But the finished products in these cases, guess what? Later on, they can be individually modified or specialized, or singular special orders can be set up in advance. But for art, uniformity in artistic expression results in meaningless, lifeless gray sludge, devoid of purpose or meaning. Consume product and get excited for next product. As for bringing down the average cost of commissioned art, I won't argue that this is broadly beneficial, especially for folks like myself who, frankly, aren't exactly swimming in funds. If I had oodles of money, do you think I'd let my teeth remain as bad as they are? Yet I would also caution against devaluing the resulting creative production too much, because we have proven time and time again throughout history, sociologically, that when most people see the cost of attaining something driven nearly to zero, they collectively begin to assume that they can value it less, both financially and intellectually. If the art becomes as easy to get as click here, folks are invariably going to start assuming that the result doesn't hold any value at all, and that damages the entire endeavor. Leaning in. If you've been reading or listening purely for my perspective on the anti versus pro Gen AI conversation, and if you have no interest or appreciation for the more personal digs that I've taken at Leaflet, I more than understand if you feel the need or desire to check out at this point, because what comes after now is almost entirely aimed at her and her clutch of fans and sycophants on this topic. If you're still here, you have been warned. I've taken a few shots at this particular VTuber, and some may feel that I've been too harsh with her, that her intentions with this program or tool set that she's been tinkering with and putting together as a sort of ease of accessibility are overall benevolent, aimed at democratizing the whole VTubing thing and making it smoother to get into. I genuinely believe that her intentions are mostly good. She and Ember have both been pointed out that by making those first steps into the sphere of VTubing less daunting, they may see it flourish and become more broadly accepted and normalized. Normalization. Anyway, that's not a bad thing on its own, and she genuinely should be lauded for her efforts, especially when one considers that she hasn't, to my understanding, asked for this thing to be crowdfunded or turned into some kind of subscription service or paid for product. That is commendable. People don't generally do something like that without an expectation of getting something in return, either immediately or down the road. The idea of altruism in its truest form or sense, people don't trust it these days, and we've got damned good reason not to, given how many times people have been rug pulled by online personalities. Kudos to her, however, for seeming to have broken that usual pattern. Moreover, it's my understanding that she's been working on this endeavor almost entirely solo, or at least with the barest minimal assistance from any other person or persons. Again, that's commendable, because that demonstrates a clear work ethic of high caliber. Though I have to be a little bit smug or smartass when I point out she had put out an image tweet recently showing herself being exhausted because of all the work she's been putting in. Leaf, aren't you the one who said, "We don't care about your efforts, just give me the results"? That whole Children of Dune thing. Anyway, and on top of the observation that the vast majority of folks who are giving her the greatest volume of grief for these efforts are some of the most obnoxious, entitled, self-righteous, violent, and maladapted cretins the internet has ever churned out, and you might find yourself willing to give her a great deal of leeway when it comes to her responses in the entire conversational gambit. But granting leeway is not the same thing as offering carte blanche to treat the entire classification of artists or opposition to her perspective like subhuman trash, which is bare hair lengths away from where she has gotten to, and frankly, nobody is above reproach. I expect that at some point, if she hears this, Ember would come in trying to breathe fire, because I am going after one of her friends, to which I would say, don't you have to go spend some time with your VTuber boyfriend who looks like a bad version of, what's his name, Albert from Hellsing, who ordered an Ichigo Kurosaki hollow mask that from Temu and put it on? Anyway, Miss Leaflet, though I believe the odds of this piece being read or listened to in its entirety or even part from start to finish by you personally are about as good as a Special Olympics relay race runner returning a kickoff for a touchdown against the Philadelphia Eagles special teams unit without their own blockers, I'd like to address you directly. The smug and dismissive response style that you've opted to lean into in all of this is not going to benefit you or your endeavors much further than it already has. Yes, it may well further entrench the support you already have, and possibly could capture a few folks who largely agree with your positions, but haven't yet been made actively aware of your channel and projects. It will draw some of those folks in, because it will draw wider attention, and as the old adage goes, there's no such thing as bad publicity. The other side of that particular coin, however, is that you are almost guaranteed to win over nobody who started from a neutral or even slightly oppositional position by being an inhuman, spiteful, and dismissive cunt. Your personality affect of only results matter is so removed from the human experience, which art is birthed from, that it leaves one wondering if you actually give a shit about art to begin with, or if productivity alone is the god to which you kneel. Yes, by the way, Miss Ember, one of your strays, as you cringe-inducingly refer to your audience, has unpleasant things to say to your beloved slime girl. This is about the time you reach for the tried-and-true chestnut of dismissal by obscurity, the debate bro tactic of, who are you? Which your audience has heard you deploy against V-tweeters who frequently attempt to attain relevance by hitching onto the coattails of more prominent personalities and getting embroiled in heated public exchanges and debacles. Trouble for you on this account is that I'm not interested in any such rise to notoriety within the VTubing sphere. As Kirsha said when going over her situation with anal violence, Anna Valens, and her attempted cancellation campaign, quote, I'm not punching down, I'm not punching up, I'm punching back. The distinct difference here, though, and I recognize it, you would be rather correct to point it out, is Leaflet's hostility has not been aimed at me personally, but rather at the entirety of anti-Gen AI folks as a whole, with a focus on the artists in their midst. Before the antis in the crowd give me too many kudos, bear in mind the following. None of this leaflet-specific material would be necessary if you could have gotten a tighter grip on the ideologue artists on your side of the conversation. Additionally, when the pro bros put forth the observation that the genie is out of the bottle with Gen AI art, I can't push back on it too hard because it echoes my sentiment with regards to firearms. That the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. I'm not entirely on either side of this conversation because there are solid points to be made from both directions, pro and anti. Yes, I tend to lean more in the direction of the antis on this particular subject, and that is largely because of my own personal biases, which stem from my ecclesiastical view of arts in tota sum, and my own endeavors as an artist of the written word, of narrative. I have a personal stake in all of this. So too does Leaflet if you've been paying attention. There was the recent X post put out on the account associated with her tabletop RPG that was effectively an open call for people to, quote, become a leaf tuber. I believe the promo copy read, yes? This in association with or reference to her adventurer program. I may have the name of it wrong there, but it's I've been working on this a while and I have only so much patience for even myself at the moment. She has skin in the game regarding Gen AI art, so I respect that she wants to promote her position and her efforts. I can't knock that. And if you're interested in it, check out her work. Do I suspect that she may have ulterior motives with this program? Yeah, but I don't think they're necessarily conscious motives. I believe that her recent appreciation for or desire to become a participant in motherhood, itself a divine duty and recently discussed by Leaflet herself on Basecamp with Malcolm and Simone, their podcast on YouTube, could well be playing a subconscious role in her devotion to this program that she's put together. Having no spouse or romantic partner that I'm aware of, The particular challenge of becoming a mother biologically poses a bit of a roadblock, which in and of itself could well cause her to sublimate the maternal or parental instinct into another form of care and nurturing, of providing that motherly devotion. The redirection of this devotion sees her pouring all manner of time, effort, and attention into this VTubing made accessible program of hers, that its participants might take on a kind of pseudo or proxy child role for her to dote on and fawn over. Now, none of this would be acted upon or directed consciously for Miss Leaflet, but rather it would all be operating under the surface, in the subconscious, where instinct and the primal emotional levers of human behavior dictate our course in quieter, subtler ways, just below our level of conscious awareness. Of course, it's entirely possible that I'm a complete wackadoo, and am totally off base making such presumptions, as if I had any kind of insight into human conditions and behavior. I'm just a Midwestern father and a husband with 4 kids at home. I'm just a janitor, okay, for a day job. I'm just a storyteller. I'm just one guy. One who, or as the term is used these days, glupshido who megalol, in the seas of untold millions of people watching and participating lightly in some of these discussions. One of thousands of people watching these VTubers and artists go back and forth past each other. Just one more voice for most of these folks to ignore. Or maybe, for once, to listen to, before it all turns gray. Cheers.